At 1:51 a.m. on September 3, 2010, Captain Doug Lamp's voice crackled through Dubai air traffic control for the final time. His words, barely audible through the static and what investigators would later identify as severe smoke inhalation, were chilling. "We're losing everything. I can't see the instruments." 24 seconds later, UPS Flight 2976 vanished from radar screens, taking with it two experienced pilots and launching one of the most disturbing aviation investigations of the modern era. What happened in those final moments wasn't just a tragic accident. It was the catastrophic culmination of a hidden danger that had been lurking in commercial aviation for years, waiting for the perfect storm of circumstances to unleash its deadly potential. The McDonnell Douglas MD-11 freighter, registration N590UP, had been climbing through the darkness of the Arabian Peninsula sky for just 38 minutes when hell literally broke loose in its cargo hold. But this wasn't an ordinary fire. What began consuming the aircraft from within was something far more sinister, a chemical chain reaction that no fire suppression system on Earth was designed to handle. The two pilots, veteran aviators with a combined 20 hours of flight experience, found themselves fighting an invisible enemy that was systematically destroying their aircraft and slowly poisoning them to death. Captain Doug Lamp, 48, was no rookie. With over 11 hours piloting heavy cargo aircraft across every continent, he'd handled emergencies that would terrify most pilots. First Officer Matthew Bell, 38, was equally experienced in international freight operations, known among his colleagues for his methodical approach to crisis management. These weren't green pilots making rookie mistakes. They were seasoned professionals who followed every procedure in the book. Yet within minutes of the first smoke detector alarm, they found themselves in a nightmare scenario that their extensive training had never prepared them for. The flight had begun like thousands of others. Dubai International Airport's cargo terminal buzzed with the familiar choreography of international freight operations. 80 tons of mixed cargo had been loaded into the MD-11's spacious holds, electronics from Asian manufacturers, automotive parts bound for German factories, consumer goods destined for European markets. Every package had been processed through standard security screening. Every manifest had been checked and double-checked. Every safety protocol had been meticulously followed. The irony would become painfully clear later. Among those seemingly innocent packages lurked the seeds of destruction, items so common and apparently harmless that they required no special handling or warning labels. At 1:15 a.m. local time, UPS 2976 lifted off from runway 12L with the routine precision of a well-oiled machine. Dubai's air traffic controllers watched the familiar green blip of the heavy freighter as it climbed steadily toward its cruising altitude of 32,000 feet. The weather was perfect. Clear skies, minimal wind, unlimited visibility. Every system on the aircraft was functioning normally. The fuel load was optimal. The cargo was properly secured. From every external perspective, this was shaping up to be another routine overnight cargo flight across the Middle East and into Europe. But deep in the aircraft's lower cargo hold, a ticking time bomb was about to activate. Not an explosive device planted by terrorists, but something potentially even more dangerous, a chemical reaction that would prove unstoppable once it began. At 1:53 a.m., just 2 minutes after takeoff, the first wisps of smoke began triggering the cargo compartment's detection systems. The aircraft's sophisticated fire warning system immediately alerted the crew with a series of urgent chimes and warning lights. Captain Lampe and First Officer Bell responded exactly as their training dictated, initiating the standard fire suppression sequence without hesitation. The Halon 1301 fire suppression system discharged into the cargo hold with explosive force, flooding the compartment with millions of dollars worth of specialized fire retardant. For a brief, hopeful moment, it seemed like the system was working. The initial smoke readings decreased. The temperature sensors showed a momentary cooling trend. Both pilots allowed themselves to believe they were dealing with a manageable situation, perhaps an overheated piece of equipment or a small electrical fire that the suppression system had successfully contained. They couldn't have been more wrong. What they didn't know, what nobody in commercial aviation fully understood at the time, was that their cargo hold contained lithium batteries that had entered a state called thermal runaway. This wasn't simply a fire that could be extinguished with conventional means. It was a self-sustaining chemical reaction that generated its own oxygen, produced temperatures exceeding 800 degrees Fahrenheit, and released a cocktail of toxic gases that could kill within minutes. The halon system, designed for ordinary combustible fires, was like trying to stop a volcanic eruption with a garden hose. As Captain Lampe banked the heavy freighter into a sweeping turn back toward Dubai International Airport, he had no idea that every maneuver was actually accelerating their doom. The aircraft's ventilation system, designed to maintain comfortable cabin pressure and temperature, was systematically pumping deadly gases from the cargo hold directly into the cockpit. Carbon monoxide, hydrogen fluoride, and other lethal compounds were silently accumulating in the air the pilots were breathing, even through their oxygen masks. The race against time had begun, but it was a race they were already losing. The MD-11's fly-by-wire flight controls, dependent on electrical systems that were being systematically destroyed by the intense heat below, began failing one by one. Navigation displays flickered and went dark. Communication radios crackled with static and fell silent. Even the emergency backup systems, designed to function in the worst-case scenarios, proved inadequate against the unique nature of this catastrophe. Subscribe to our channel so you don't miss the next videos in this investigation, because what we're about to uncover will change how you think about every flight you've ever taken. The tragedy of UPS 2976 wasn't just a freak accident, it was the predictable result of a perfect storm of regulatory failures, design flaws, and corporate decisions that prioritized efficiency over safety. And the most disturbing part, aviation authorities had been warned about exactly this type of scenario years before it happened. As the minutes ticked by and Dubai's runway lights grew closer, Captain Lampe and First Officer Bell were fighting a battle they couldn't see against an enemy they couldn't understand. Their aircraft was being destroyed from within by forces that defied every assumption about aviation safety. And somewhere in the toxic haze filling their cockpit, the terrible realization was beginning to dawn that they might not make it home. To understand how two experienced pilots found themselves trapped in an airborne death chamber, we need to go back to the events that set this tragedy in motion. The story begins not with UPS Flight 2976, but with a revolution in consumer technology that was quietly transforming the cargo holds of aircraft around the world. Lithium-ion batteries had become the invisible backbone of modern life, powering everything from laptops and cell phones to electric tools and medical devices. By 2010, billions of these compact powerhouses were crisscrossing the globe every day in the cargo holds of passenger and freight aircraft. The MD-11 that Captain Lampe was flying that night represented the pinnacle of 1990s cargo aircraft design. McDonnell Douglas had built these tri-engine workhorses to carry massive payloads across intercontinental distances with unprecedented efficiency. At 200 feet in length, with a cargo capacity of nearly 200 tons, the MD-11F was essentially a flying warehouse. But like many aircraft designed in the pre-digital age, it harbored a critical vulnerability that wouldn't become apparent until technology evolved beyond the designer's imagination. The cargo hold of N590 that night contained what manifests listed as consumer electronics, a generic term that covered thousands of individual lithium batteries packed into devices ranging from power tools to portable DVD players. Each battery by itself was completely safe when functioning normally. The problem arose when these batteries were damaged during shipping, exposed to extreme temperatures, or manufactured with microscopic defects that could remain dormant for months before activating. Doug Lamper had joined UPS Airlines in 2004, drawn by the company's reputation for safety and its global reach. Born in Kentucky and raised in a family of aviators, he'd always dreamed of flying the world's largest cargo aircraft. His logbook told the story of a careful, methodical pilot who'd never had a reportable incident in over a decade of international flying. Matt Bell, his first officer that night, had followed a similar path. Military training, regional airlines, then the prestigious world of international cargo operations. Both men had completed extensive training on lithium battery hazards just 6 months earlier, but that training focused on prevention and early detection, not surviving the unsurvivable. The warning signs had been building in the aviation industry for years, but they came in the form of scattered incidents that regulators struggled to connect. In 2006, a UPS DC-8 had made an emergency landing in Philadelphia after smoke in the cargo hold, later traced to lithium batteries. In 2008, a similar incident forced a FedEx MD-11 to return to Memphis. Each time, crews had managed to land safely, and investigations had recommended enhanced procedures and improved training. But no one had recognized that they were dealing with a fundamentally different type of fire that required entirely new suppression technologies. The Federal Aviation Administration and its international counterparts had been walking a tightrope for years. Lithium batteries were becoming essential to global commerce, but they represented a new category of hazardous material that didn't fit existing regulatory frameworks. Industry pressure to maintain the flow of goods was enormous. Billions of dollars in commerce depended on the ability to ship these batteries quickly and efficiently. Safety regulators found themselves trying to write rules for a technology that was evolving faster than their understanding of its risks. What made the situation even more complex was the MD-11's design philosophy. Unlike modern cargo aircraft with sophisticated compartmentalization systems, the MD-11 relied on a shared environmental system that connected the cargo holds to the cockpit. This design worked perfectly for conventional fires, which consume oxygen and can be starved of fuel. But lithium battery fires are self-sustaining chemical reactions that actually generate their own oxygen while producing hydrogen fluoride, one of the most toxic gases known to science. At 1:56 a.m., as Captain Lampe struggled to maintain control of his deteriorating aircraft, the temperature in the lower cargo hold had already exceeded 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit. The aluminum structure of the aircraft itself was beginning to weaken. Electrical cables were melting, severing the connections between the cockpit and the flight control computers. The Halon fire suppression system had been completely overwhelmed within minutes, its chemical agents either consumed by the intense heat or rendered ineffective by the unique chemistry of the lithium reaction. The crew's training had taught them to expect certain things from an in-flight fire emergency. They expected the fire suppression system to either extinguish the blaze or at least contain it long enough to reach an airport. They expected their oxygen masks to provide clean, breathable air. They expected their flight controls to remain responsive even in the worst-case scenario. Every one of these expectations was about to be shattered by a technology that was still poorly understood by the very people responsible for regulating its transport. As the lights of Dubai International Airport grew larger in the windscreen, neither pilot could have imagined that they were already dead men flying. The toxic gases filling their cockpit had reached concentrations that would prove fatal within minutes, even with their oxygen masks functioning perfectly. The aircraft's flight control systems were failing in a cascade pattern that no simulator had ever replicated, and in the cargo hold below them, The chemical fire was entering a phase that would soon make the entire aircraft structurally unsound. The clock was ticking, but time had already run out. What happened next in the cockpit of UPS 2976 was captured in horrifying detail by the aircraft's cockpit voice recorder, a device that would later provide investigators with a minute-by-minute account of how two professional pilots fought against impossible odds. At 1:58 a.m., Captain Lampe's voice, now noticeably strained and hoarse, reported to Dubai approach control. "We have heavy smoke in the cockpit, requesting immediate clearance for approach." The controller's response was swift and professional, clearing the aircraft for an emergency straight-in approach to runway 12L. But what the controller couldn't know was that he was talking to men who were already being slowly poisoned by an invisible killer. The toxic cocktail filling the MD-11's cockpit was unlike anything in aviation emergency training. Hydrogen fluoride, one of the most corrosive substances known to science, was eating away at the pilots' respiratory systems with each breath. Carbon monoxide was binding to their hemoglobin, starving their brains of oxygen, even as they fought to maintain consciousness. Most insidious of all, the gases were attacking the aircraft's electronic systems, creating cascading failures that made the plane increasingly difficult to control. First Officer Bell, his voice barely recognizable through the smoke and chemical burns in his throat, attempted to read the emergency checklist. But the cockpit displays were flickering erratically as electrical circuits succumbed to the corrosive gases. The primary flight display went dark at 2:02 a.m., followed seconds later by the navigation system. The MD-11's fly-by-wire flight controls, dependent on computer systems that were being systematically destroyed, began exhibiting erratic behavior that defied the pilot's inputs. What investigators would later discover was that the fire in the cargo hold had entered what's known as a propagation phase. The initial lithium batteries that had started the reaction were now causing adjacent batteries to enter thermal runaway, creating a chain reaction that was spreading throughout the cargo compartment. Each new battery that joined the conflagration added more fuel to the fire and released additional toxic gases. The temperature in some areas of the cargo hold was now approaching 200 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to melt aluminum and compromise the structural integrity of the aircraft itself. At 2:04 a.m., Captain Lampe made a decision that probably saved hundreds of lives on the ground. As the aircraft descended through 80 feet on approach to Dubai, he realized that he was losing the ability to control the plane's flight path. Rather than continue the approach and risk crashing into the populated areas surrounding the airport, he turned the aircraft toward the empty desert south of the city. His final radio transmission, barely intelligible through the static and his deteriorating condition, was a testament to his professionalism even in the face of certain death. "We're not going to make it." Turning away from the airport. The science behind what was killing these men was as fascinating as it was terrifying. Lithium-ion batteries in thermal runaway don't just burn. They undergo a violent electrochemical reaction that generates temperatures hot enough to melt steel. The process is self-sustaining, meaning that once it begins, it cannot be stopped by conventional fire suppression methods. The gases produced are not just toxic, but actively corrosive, capable of eating through metal and destroying electronic components within minutes. Dr. Amanda Rodriguez, a material scientist who would later testify before Congress about lithium battery safety, explained the phenomenon in terms that highlighted its unique dangers. When lithium batteries enter thermal runaway, they essentially become miniature chemical weapons. They produce hydrogen fluoride, which can kill in concentrations as low as 30 parts per million. They generate their own oxygen, making them impossible to smother. and they reach temperatures that can compromise aircraft structures designed to withstand extreme conditions. And comment below what you think about these safety regulations, because what we're about to reveal about the aviation industry's response to previous warnings will shock you. The truth is that UPS 2976 wasn't the first aircraft to face this nightmare scenario. It wasn't even the second or third. Aviation authorities around the world had been receiving reports of lithium battery incidents for years, but the response had been fragmented, inadequate, and fatally slow. Internal documents that came to light during the investigation revealed a pattern of near misses that should have triggered immediate action. In 2009 alone, there had been 17 reported incidents of lithium batteries overheating in aircraft cargo holds. Most had been contained before reaching the catastrophic stage that claimed UPS 2976, but the warning signs were unmistakable. Industry experts had been sounding alarms about the inadequacy of existing fire suppression systems when faced with lithium battery fires, but their warnings had been largely ignored. The MD-11's final moments were captured not just by radar and voice recordings, but by the aircraft's flight data recorder, which continued transmitting information even as the plane's systems failed. The data painted a picture of an aircraft in its death throes, control surfaces moving erratically, engine parameters fluctuating wildly, and structural sensors indicating temperatures and stresses far beyond design limits. At 2:09 a.m., UPS Flight 2976 disappeared from radar screens forever. The wreckage of UPS Flight 2976 told a story that no one was prepared to hear. When investigators reached the crash site 24 hours after impact, they found a scene that defied conventional understanding of aircraft accidents. The MD-11 had struck the desert floor at nearly 400 miles per hour, but what shocked the investigation team wasn't the violence of the impact. It was what had happened to the aircraft long before it hit the ground. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the lead metallurgist for the UAE's General Civil Aviation Authority, had investigated dozens of aircraft accidents in her career. But when she examined the cargo hold remnants of N590-UP, she found something that chilled her to the bone. Large sections of the aircraft's aluminum structure had been reduced to twisted, melted fragments. The cargo floor, designed to support 80 tons of freight, had buckled and warped from heat so intense that it had fundamentally altered the metal's molecular structure. What we found defied everything we thought we knew about in-flight fires, Mitchell later testified. The damage patterns were consistent with temperatures exceeding 200 degrees Fahrenheit sustained for at least 15 minutes. No conventional fire suppression system could have survived these conditions, let alone controlled them. The investigation took a stunning turn when forensic experts examined the pilot's oxygen masks. Captain Lampe and First Officer Bell had followed protocol perfectly, donning their emergency oxygen equipment within seconds of the first smoke alarm. But the masks, designed to filter out smoke and provide pure oxygen, had become death traps. The intense heat had compromised the rubber seals, allowing toxic gases to enter the breathing apparatus. Worse yet, the chemical composition of the smoke contained gases that could penetrate even intact breathing equipment. Dr. James Harrison, a toxicologist brought in to analyze tissue samples from the crew, made a discovery that sent shockwaves through the aviation industry. The pilots were exposed to lethal concentrations of hydrogen fluoride and carbon monoxide for at least 12 minutes before impact, he reported. Even with perfect oxygen masks, they would have been unconscious within 8 minutes of the initial exposure. They were essentially flying dead. But the most damning revelation came from deep inside UPS's own safety files. Internal emails dating back to 2007 showed that the company's safety engineers had raised concerns about lithium battery shipments after a series of near-miss incidents. One email, marked confidential, safety critical, warned that current fire suppression technology is inadequate for lithium battery thermal events and recommended immediate restrictions on battery shipments until new suppression systems could be developed. The email had been forwarded to UPS's Regulatory Affairs Department, where it disappeared into a maze of committees and cost-benefit analyses. A follow-up memo from the company's insurance division calculated that implementing new fire suppression systems across the fleet would cost approximately $200 million. The potential liability from lithium battery incidents was estimated at $50 million annually. The cold mathematics of corporate decision-making had sealed the fate of Flight 2976 3 years before it took off. Even more disturbing was the revelation that Boeing, the manufacturer responsible for MD-11 maintenance support, had received similar warnings from multiple airlines. A classified report prepared for the FAA in 2009 had explicitly stated that MD-11 aircraft are particularly vulnerable to cargo hold fires due to inadequate compartmentalization between cargo and crew areas. The report recommended mandatory retrofits for all MD-11 cargo aircraft within 24 months. The retrofits never happened. Congressional investigators later uncovered a web of regulatory failures that stretched across multiple agencies and countries. The International Civil Aviation Organization had been aware of lithium battery risks since 2006, but had deferred action pending further study. The FAA had initiated a rulemaking process in 2008, but had been stalled by industry lobbying, claiming that new regulations would cripple international commerce. Meanwhile, airlines continued shipping millions of lithium batteries in aircraft cargo holds using fire suppression systems that everyone knew were inadequate. The breakthrough moment in the investigation came when Dr. Chen Wei, a battery technology expert from MIT, recreated the thermal runaway sequence in a laboratory setting. Using batteries identical to those shipped on Flight 2976, he demonstrated how a single damaged battery could trigger a chain reaction involving hundreds of other batteries within minutes. The test, conducted in a sealed chamber equipped with the same halon suppression system used on the MD-11, showed the fire suppression agent being completely overwhelmed within 90 seconds. "We weren't just dealing with a fire," Dr. Chen explained to the investigation board. "We were dealing with a chemical weapon that created itself. Every safety system on that aircraft was designed for a threat that no longer existed." The final piece of the puzzle came from an unexpected source. The aircraft's black box data revealed that Captain Lampe had made one last desperate attempt to save his aircraft and crew. In his final moments, Captain Doug Lampe did something that aviation experts initially dismissed as impossible. The flight data recorder showed that at 2:07 a.m., with the aircraft's primary flight controls completely compromised and toxic gases flooding the cockpit, Lampe somehow managed to execute a controlled turn away from populated areas and configure the aircraft for what investigators would later recognize as an attempted emergency landing in the desert. Dr. Patricia Williams, a human factors specialist who studied the final minutes of Flight 2976, struggled to explain how pilots in the advanced stages of hydrogen fluoride poisoning could have maintained any semblance of control. "By all medical standards, both crew members should have been unconscious for at least 3 minutes before impact," she testified. Yet the flight data shows deliberate, purposeful control inputs right up until the final seconds. It defies medical understanding, but demonstrates the extraordinary dedication these men had to their profession and to protecting others. That dedication came at the ultimate price, but it also provided investigators with the final pieces of evidence needed to understand exactly what had gone wrong. The controlled nature of the crash preserved crucial wreckage that revealed the true extent of the cargo hold destruction. Forensic analysis showed that the lithium batteries had created a sustained chemical fire that had burned for nearly 20 minutes, reaching temperatures that had begun to compromise the aircraft's primary structure. The wings were starting to separate from the fuselage. The flight controls had been reduced to melted cables and destroyed hydraulic lines. The MD-11 had literally been disintegrating in mid-air. The revelation that shook the aviation industry to its core came from a seemingly minor detail in the cargo manifest. Among the electronic devices in the lower hold was a shipment of counterfeit laptop batteries that had bypassed normal safety inspections through fraudulent documentation. These batteries, manufactured with substandard materials and inadequate safety systems, were the ignition source that had triggered the thermal runaway cascade. The irony was devastating. The very cost-cutting measures that made lithium batteries profitable to manufacture and ship had created the conditions for this tragedy. Within 6 months of the final investigation report, the regulatory landscape of aviation safety was transformed. The International Civil Aviation Organization implemented emergency regulations requiring new fire suppression systems specifically designed for lithium battery fires. The United States Congress passed the Cargo Aircraft Safety Act, mandating comprehensive upgrades to fire detection and suppression systems on all cargo aircraft. Airlines worldwide faced retrofit requirements that would cost billions of dollars but would prevent future tragedies. UPS itself became a leader in lithium battery safety, investing over $300 million in new fire suppression technology and implementing the most stringent battery shipping protocols in the industry. The company established the Lampe Bell Safety Foundation, named after the 2 pilots who died in Flight 2976, to fund research into cargo fire suppression and toxic gas protection systems. Every UPS pilot now carries equipment that could have saved the lives of Captain Lampe and First Officer Bell if it had existed on that September night in 2010. But the changes came too late for the families whose lives were shattered by this preventable tragedy. Doug Lampe left behind a wife and 2 teenage children who learned of their father's heroism through investigation reports rather than his own words. Matt Bell's parents, both retired teachers, became advocates for aviation safety reform, traveling the country to speak about the importance of proactive safety measures rather than reactive responses to disasters. The technical lessons of UPS 2976 revolutionized aircraft design and cargo safety protocols, but the human lessons are equally profound. This tragedy demonstrated how the relentless pursuit of efficiency and profit can blind organizations to emerging risks. It showed how regulatory systems designed for yesterday's threats can become inadequate for tomorrow's dangers. Most importantly, it proved that even in the face of impossible odds, professional aviators will sacrifice everything to protect others. Share this story with someone who needs to understand that behind every safety regulation is a human tragedy that could have been prevented. The next time you board an aircraft or ship a package containing lithium batteries, remember that your safety depends on lessons written in blood by pilots who never made it home. Captain Doug Lampe and First Officer Matthew Bell died fighting to save an aircraft that was already doomed, but their final actions saved countless lives on the ground and led to safety improvements that protect millions of passengers and crew members today. UPS Flight 2976 crashed into the Arabian Desert on September 3, 2010, but its legacy continues to save lives every day. In aviation, we learn from tragedy so that it never happens again. This is how we honor the memory of those who paid the ultimate price for our understanding of what can go wrong when we prioritize convenience over caution and profit over people.